Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Renewables Podcast. Thank you very much for coming back. Before we crack on with today's podcast, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel on YouTube or following us on Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts, head over there and give us a follow. We'd really appreciate it, and it'll inform you when another podcast is out. But today we are discussing a really interesting topic that we've spoken about before on podcasts, but never had it's never had the grand title of having its own podcast. But before we get into that, how are you doing, Mark? How's the world of solar for you?
I always say I'm good, but I think we've just been speaking before recording that we're in, it's a difficult time of year. I think we're all getting a bit fed up due to the weather, and work doesn't always go swimmingly, does it? So I'm sharing the raw honesty that I'm all right, but I could be better.
Yeah, I was wondering when I asked that question. I knew it was slightly loaded because literally just off camera, and actually we have recorded part of it, but there's some parts that we definitely can't show. And I wondered what you'd actually say on that because I was ready to give it both barrels. I am, I'm having one of those weeks this week where you're just like, I just don't want to do solar. I obviously do, and I do love it, but running your own business is tricky, and most people listening to this who run their own business or are senior in other people's businesses who share some of those stresses will know exactly where we're coming from in terms of the stresses and the challenges of having your own business, running in solar, fighting the good fight to try and do a good job and everything else. So it's all good. Everything is running well. The business is doing well. It's just the pressures of trying to keep it going and keep everybody happy, employees, customers, kids, everyone trying to do that is a bit tricky. But yeah, I feel like I've been healed through our conversations that we've had off camera. So
Yeah, we don't need to have another episode of therapy on this one, I don't think. But yeah, it's just one of those things, isn't it? I think time to time it gets on top of you, and it's better to get it out than keep it in and 100%. move forward with it all washed away. But this topic we've got, there's elements of worries in business built into that, because we're going to talk about where we see the renewables industry going, and that occupies parts of my headspace. I don't know if it does yours. When you're trying to, even down to like what might be the next product that's going to take off. We've had an example of that with Sarge Energy. You've been through it with Solar Edge before as well. And as an installation company, being ahead of that curve is quite a nice place to sit, isn't it? So there's those kind of things in your mind. And then also more widely, what are the new technologies outside of our own industry around the entirety of renewables? There's lots of exciting avenues to pile down to in that.
Yeah, there is. And it's really tricky to try and keep ahead in the renewables game, and that's why I think it's a good topic for us to chat about, because we've spoken, like I mentioned right at the opening of this podcast, we've spoken when guests have been here about where the industry started, how it progressed, kind of what I kind of class as like the three phases of solar that we've been through, which I'll go through again in a minute. But it's like, what's the fourth, fifth, sixth one of that, and will it be a hardware thing, or will it be more of a software AI side of things? And I think that's the tricky thing to try and really nail down, even in this podcast, because we just don't know where it's going to go. But there's some certain avenues that that I feel like we're going to go down. But shall I give you a quick overview as to where I've seen it, having been doing it since I was 16, where I've seen it right from the start. Or from start of my career to where we are now, and I'll quickly run through those three kind of phases as I've kind of thought about that. So phase one, where most of the public will probably have seen solar popping up, and first seen a solar panel will have been during the feed-in tariff, and that was one of these schemes that if you had some money in the bank, it was almost like printing money to homeowners, because you were basically paying for an installation. It was being put on your roof, and it didn't really matter what you did with the power. You could use it, or you could let it go back to the grid. There wasn't really batteries out back then. There was only really lead acid stuff, and big, bulky, very expensive, some lithium bits. But it was really the feed-in tariff, or FIT, was about just getting paid to generate power. Like every government thing, it had a rubbish name. Like it was a feed-in tariff. So a lot of people, even to this day, that have had it since, very early on, think that the feed-in tariff was they were getting paid for exporting power back to the grid. Of course, we know that they're not. They're getting paid to generate it. So that and part of me wonders whether or not that's stopping them from getting a battery because they're worried they'll lose the fit because they're not feeding it in anymore. So the name wasn't very well thought through. But when I first started, we were signing people up under the company I was working for 43 pence per kilowatt hour. So they were getting paid 43 pence per kilowatt hour to just generate the power. Obviously, if they used that power, they were saving an extra, back then, 15p per kilowatt hour that they didn't have to buy in. But now with inflation, they're up at like 70 odd pence per kilowatt hour, plus the bit that they get for any exported power, which is usually 50% of what they generate. But anyway, we moved past that point and we got to the point where the feed-in tariff went, and actually so did the export tariff for a while. And suddenly lithium batteries were kind of coming online. You were seeing the likes of companies like Sonnen, PowerVault were kind of some of the first battery companies out there, and we started fitting batteries because customers needed that payback time. It's always been about this blooming payback time, and batteries allowed them to store that energy and give it back to the house. Then there was a few legal challenges around the export payments because people quite rightly pointed out that if they're investing 10, 15, 20 grand into a solar PV and battery storage system, any excess solar power that they send back to the grid, it's not really fair that they're giving that back for free. And that was kind of removed as part of the feed-in tariff when that got removed. And so what they ended up doing is reinstating the feed-in tariff at the export rate of 4p, which was nothing. So it didn't really change people's decisions on getting a battery. They were getting a battery because the export rate was rubbish. They were saving 15, 16, 17p, whatever they were paying per kilowatt hour, and happy days. They were happy with that. And then the final phase where we are now is we have the batteries, we have the solar. The export rates start to be tweaked by companies like Octopus and others, where they're variable at different times of day, but they're also a lot more attractive. And batteries have got cheaper, panels have got cheaper, as you know, Mark. And suddenly the market opens to more people and opens up to people that maybe don't want solar but want a battery. And there's a whole backup side of things as well, where backup comes in. So we're kind of in this phase now where we're in a self-consumption phase where we're generating our own power, storing it in a battery, but we're also looking now, and we're really at the start of this, of batteries buying and selling that power in SIG Energy's system, even automatically through the AI and everything else. So all of that's kind of where I see us at the minute. We're right on this, almost like a stage 4 of like energy traders, as well as people that are just buying cheap power in overnight because they use a lot of power through a heat pump. We're just crossing over from that into energy trading. So that's kind of a brief history of how it's all moved around, and that's before we even talk about anything EV based or heat pump based.
It's really interesting, and what you've said there about customers not realising their feed-in tariff payment isn't an export thing, it's based on generation. I saw a customer this morning, he's called Paul, he doesn't watch the podcast, but if he does, hello Paul, he had no idea that he could have a battery in it installed and it wouldn't affect his feed-in tariff because it's not based on what you send into the grid. He just thought that's how his system has always worked. So it was news to him, and that changes people's mindsets in going forward with this stuff, because those things you've just listed there, Sam, it's all very heavily financially driven, be it been an investment to get a better return than you would have with your money in the bank, as it was through the feed-in tariff era, or because energy costs have risen as they have in recent years and people are making those decisions to offset that through using renewable generation or battery storage for load shifting. So finance plays a massive part in the development and how all of this is moving. There's the environmental side of it and the net zero and the green stuff, which a certain percentage of consumers do hold central, but most are making their choices, certainly the ones I spend a lot of time chatting to, in the financial angle of it. So I think whatever is coming next, that will be the real engine behind it. And you're dead right with the trading of energy. That's another financial tool now that people are using. You know, we can buy energy in. This customer we've installed for this week, he's got 108 kilowatt hours of storage, and he's fully intending on using elements of that to energy trade. So people are already starting to make those decisions, and maybe as these tariffs become more fluid and Octopus do some even crazier things, maybe to support local infrastructure where they'll be receiving money from the DNOs to help do it, where those things could become even more generous for consumers.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's quite interesting when customers are forward thinking and actually put their chips on the table for almost like betting and investing on that export payment being there, and that difference between the day and the night rate being there for a long time. I personally think it will be. What worries me slightly is energy companies starting to lock down people into their ecosystem. We saw it with the batteries and the solar and these whole ecosystems. And what worries me slightly is the whole like Octopus intelligence stuff is all really good. Giving them a bit of control so that they can optimize stuff and you getting a bit of the cut of the proceeds. But it's when it becomes that the only option is to be on the intelligent tariffs and you have to use this and have to use that. And, it's just a worry that people build these monopolies and then control what can actually happen. So I'm hoping that it remains kind of a pretty free market in that sense. I'm not against companies like Octopus having better rates for people that are in the club, quote unquote, in the club, that have the right battery system, and have signed up for that tariff, and that's fine. But it's when potentially people get locked out from that. And yeah, I'm just a little bit worried about the ecosystem spread of this a little bit. But fingers crossed it all remains fairly open and people can still chop and change as to where it comes. And actually, I'd love to see more energy companies provide tariffs a bit like Octopus, because, they can't be that unique.
No, I was starting to see little bits of it springing up. Was it Tomato Energy, I think, did a bit of it, and E.ON started to do a few more tariffs based around renewables, but still Octopus are like miles ahead with that. They do the energy tariffs so well, in fairness to them, and every consumer is well aware that if you're getting renewables, they're at the start point, aren't they? And I still think, as you've just highlighted, there's a risk there of monopolisation. We had it originally with gas and electric, didn't we, with British Gas and Centrica and all the rest of that lot, where there was price fixing allegations of the past through the 80s and the 90s, and I'm sure those things are still prevalent in big companies today. But I do think Octopus generally try to be fair with their consumers, I would say, at that level. There's elements of discussion around their installation activities, but we'll keep that for a separate conversation, I think. So I think it's there to stay. It's more how all of it is going to integrate amongst the kit and the energy companies, because even with Octopus now and Intelligent, it only works with certain brands, and I don't know if that's contractual arrangements they've got with Give Energy, for example, who are one of the battery storage systems that will integrate with Intelligent automatically. And other companies like Sig Energy are currently using AI and API monitoring or whatever the clever Home Assistant style stuff is to make that work. So unlocking all of that so every battery system and consumer has access to it is something that I think needs to happen in much the same way a lot of the kit, we spoke about this with Jason, where it all starts to need to speak to each other, certainly inside an installation as a whole, but even more widely down a street. So if you're looking at kind of managing the limited load effect on a street and not putting as much strain on the DNO network as would be happening, you need these systems to work together. And it could be that, Sam, you get paid, you've got a lot of storage in your battery, we'll pay you 20p a unit for it, for example, and then 2 hours later, they might start paying me for that to support the street because my battery's filled up, and there'll be elements of that. So we're not all taking our power from the transformer. Rather than paying for those big DNO infrastructure upgrades, consumers are encouraged to fund that by getting the return trade in energy. And there was an interesting podcast, I don't know if you've watched it yet, with Sam and Jamie, and I've forgotten the lady's name now, where they were speaking
I was just listening
a
to
lot
it
about
as you can.
Really interesting. And I think she was saying there's elements of that the government should look towards, rather than spending billions and billions on these renewable schemes out in the sea, and actually looking at consumers doing lots more self-generation and buying that energy at an inflated price to kind of help fund it. So there's all kinds of interesting stuff that's happening at those levels, and I think that's a big innovation that's coming as all this stuff starts playing nice together with tariffs, with the kit, and heat pumps as well. That's something that we're not installing at the minute. I don't really know a great deal about heat pumps other than the radial circuit to supply them, but there has to be some integration in the kit and smart world of stuff with that as well, I think, to get best value from it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think the next phase that, like we've just been talking about, I think it comes with is a wider integration because, I mean, I might be totally wrong, but I can't think of another like piece of kit that we need. Obviously, I'm not saying that things like Sig Energy is a new piece of kit, so effectively it's a battery in a different box, but it's I can't think that we would need, this, because there are things like heat batteries and things like that that are maybe a little bit more niche. But I can't think of anything hardware based that we would necessarily need. I think it's going to be more about the integration, how things play nicely. And if you have a look at what's out there, you start seeing these like smart grid ready heat pumps and things like that, where they allow for external integration. Like I know SolarEdge is one controller that they have that works with the majority of heat pumps, where you can bring that data into the SolarEdge dashboard, and it gives you an element of control over it as well. So I think as we move forward, and there's obviously a lot of legacy systems there, I feel like manufacturers are going to have to just open things up a little bit outside of their ecosystems to try and capture more customers, because at the minute, I feel like a lot of the marketing up until kind of this point has been based on trying to capture that customer that hasn't got solar, hasn't got a battery, and there's still lots of them that haven't, but it's been about capturing that customer and then selling them their full ecosystem. Whether or not it's My Energy or SolarEdge or Sig or Give or whoever, it's all about doing that. I feel like the next step is more on opening that out a little bit to work with things like heat pumps or third-party EV chargers, maybe. Companies like Hypervolt that to my knowledge, haven't got like a battery or anything like that, potentially bringing them into the ecosystems of people like Sig Energy or, these other ones that I know they've got their own EV charger, but opening things up a little bit so that things play nicely together. Because the amount of times we've had it on this one that I've been filming today, this job we've been filming today, where, the Zappi does drain the battery at certain periods, and he has to manually do a lot of stuff to make that work better, and expecting the customer to just change their EV charger that's not 2 years old just because of software issues seems a little bit of a stretch, and kind of eats or fights against that kind of eco credibility. So I think opening up that would be really handy. But I think with the integration comes sort of, I suppose, slightly newer technology like the sort of DC bidirectional charging, discharging of vehicles, because we just got these vehicles now that, my car's an EV, and that fully charged, that can do like 300 and some odd miles. It's very rare that I need that much in it. So there's easily like 30% of that could be just used every night to help balance the grid. Mm-hmm. So stuff like that, I think, would be really interesting to see how that all comes about. But I think we're still fairly early on that. But I know we've obviously Sig Energy have a charger that can do that now.
Yeah, they do. It's limited in the range of vehicles it's compatible with or supported by. I think it will work with more than the list on the supported vehicles, but you're chancing your arm by giving it a go. So yeah, the cars is a great point. That's another thing that needs to come into that same ecosystem, because it's a massive energy store, isn't it? And all of these things need to be able to communicate and talk to each other. As much as we like looking at nice inverters we've installed on the wall that's beautifully laid out and look brilliant, most customers are focused on the app and ease of using it. The odd one or two like how it looks as well, but most of them don't care. They just want an app that works, something that is easy for them to control. And I think that's the innovation that lots of these brands are doing now. And the Sig Energy example, their product, if you look at it pound for pound in its capability, it's no more or less capable than most other kit that's out there. Where they've excelled is their app development, the investment they've put into AI, the ease and operation of how that app works. And when you look at it against some of the other competition out there, they've done a really good job. But when you look at the actual inverters, there's little subtle differences. But if you're comparing it to a Tesla Powerwall 3, there's not a lot in it. The Give Energy AI 2, there's other brands out there as well. They all punch at the same kind of level. They've just done an incredible job with that, and consumers clearly like it. I think that's why we're seeing a lot of these white boxes going on everyone's wall. It's all much for muchness. You said it on Instagram the other day. Every post you see is one of those now, isn't it? And that's sort of driving the market. I think that's where it is going. It's, as you've said, this fourth or fifth wave, whatever we're on, it is in the world now of software, AI, apps, and the kit, as you've just said, is all kind of about where it needs to be. I think we will see innovation in the batteries, where they might become smaller, cheaper, maybe different chemistries, but the core function of how a battery works is going to stay the same. The solar panels have been as they have since you started installing, just got bigger and more powerful. That's going to remain. The heat pumps are well-established technology. I don't see anything else coming to get in the mix with it. I mean, you never know, but I don't think so. So that's where I see the next driving thing. And I guess from an installation point of view, it's how do you forward plan to use that with your customers and work with them to encourage them adopting this stuff? Because I still think the mass adoption phase is in the world of lots of people who are living in energy poverty and they haven't got 20 grand to spend on these systems. And if we really want to have this sector grow in the way Net Zero says it needs to, those people need to have this kit. And I think that's the next opening up of a new wave of installations. That's the areas I see anyway. More affordability and app and integration.
Yeah, and that affordability may come down to the chemistry that the batteries are made of, or the density, so that they're smaller, smaller units and things. I mean, you're already seeing some of that with things like the SIG Energy. Like, I come from a history of fitting a Sonnen battery, which was like a wardrobe. and so, like on some of your Instagram stuff and that, Mark, and some of the stuff we fitted, I look at a SIG Energy on the wall, I'm like, that is tiny. That looks almost like freakishly small for what, for what we used to fit. You couldn't have operated out of like a Blingo van fitting a Sonnen because you just couldn't fit it in. And so we're at that stage now where things have got a bit more compact, a bit nicer to look at and everything. And yeah, I think there's potentially in this fourth kind of phase, as I see it, I think there may well be some changes around the chemistry and everything, which is really exciting. And I really like the look of some of these out there that are pushing the boundaries on that. But I think a battery will just remain a battery. When we've unlocked the grid compatibility in terms of charging from the grid, discharging to the grid, it's how that process becomes easier and more automatic. And if we can unlock more benefit to an end user from doing that charging and discharging process, then the hardware is the hardware. That'll store power, and it'll give it to the grid, or it'll charge from the grid, or give it to your house and charge from the solar as well. But it's kind of what other schemes are there? For example, demand side response and this whole grid supporting side of things. I think that is a really key part of it because it's local, it's infrastructure that the grid don't, or the DNOs don't have to pay for because it's an investment done by the individual homeowner. All they've got to do is basically pay for the capacity. So they're not having to maintain any hardware apart from their cables and their transformers and stuff that they've already got. But they're getting the functionality through just a straightforward payment to those end users for power when they need it, or power in preparation for when they may need it, which I'm sure would be cheaper than, putting a lot of investment into a massive battery farm for themselves to use. So I think hardware-wise, I don't see a huge amount of change, apart from maybe a bit of battery chemistry change. I think the real leap will be demand-side response and any other sort of schemes like that allow the functionality that's already within these battery systems to actually be leveraged even more to give homeowners a bigger benefit and therefore make the math a little bit better for people looking to invest in a battery system.
Yeah, the maths have to make sense to the mass market of consumers for sure. And there's always a fly in the ointment around all of this, and that's the regulations and the rules to this stuff. And we've seen it with PAS and where we can actually install batteries. Is that going to be a limiting factor in terms of apartments, flats, terraced homes? And we've then got the regulation writers in the electrical sphere of stuff and the DNOs allowing connections of generating equipment, even if customers are using batteries not for export, they still need permission to connect if you're outside of a G9T8. And it's how all of that is going to going to map out as well, because that could really throttle demand if all of a sudden, you're applying for connections and you've been told, well, you can fit a 1 kilowatt inverter, and people aren't going to want that, are they? And the same if the PAS is saying it's not safe to have battery storage in a flat, for example. I'm not saying that is what it is saying, but if it was, that's another vast proportion of the population who can't have this stuff. So that all needs taken into account as well. And I think us as installers need to really get on the case of industry to think about those things carefully, rather than all the reasons we shouldn't do something. How can we engineer to be able to do it, to look after those people, to give them access to this technology, to get their energy bills down? It's really easy to just say we shouldn't do this because it's dangerous, don't do it. Well, let's look at how we could do it. Let's come up with some solutions to that. We're always told that as installers, let's hear your solutions and ideas. We need to ask that back to industry a little bit, because we've been told quite often what we shouldn't do and not enough of how we can do something. And batteries inside flats and terrace domes is a big one at the minute.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it goes back to the other point you made, Mark, about this mass adoption within social housing and people that are in energy poverty, which might not be social housing, but people that are hitting hard times, in terms of their energy bills, because we're seeing energy bills go up and up and up, and that stretches the budgets of a lot of people that don't have much money to go around, and suddenly that's a lot more money they've got to find on a fairly tight budget. And I think, to the point that I made about the grid support and demand side response side of things, I think if that's developed, then suddenly there becomes let's just take a council, for example, there becomes a stronger case for it, because they know that they can lift people out of energy poverty, but also potentially get some money from each system because of the demand side response element, and maybe working with the local network operator to go, where are you struggling for capacity on the network? Where's a high using place, and lining that up with where they've got some social housing, and go, well, actually, we can put you some demand in these properties. It will fit you a 10 kilowatt hour battery system. 5 can be for the homeowner. The other 5 can be for the DNO, and we've got 10 properties there. So that's 50 kilowatt hours that you can draw upon whenever you want, and you pay us X amount per month to have use of that, or however the financials would work. But that would kind of be a double whammy for them, because that would help those families that are living in those buildings, but it was also help the capacity in the area potentially for capacity, which might be a too simplistic way of looking at it for cash strapped councils. But yeah, and obviously people that are in high rise buildings, there's quite a lot of social housing that is in high rise, and you look at things like the sodium batteries and whether or not that mitigates some of the risk of PAS as well. It's maybe part of the mix.
Definitely with the chemistries, there's a new discussion to have around that, isn't it? Because it wasn't on the table when they formulated that document. I'm not a chemist, so I assume salt water is quite safe, but I'm guessing as much as stating a fact on that front. And if it turns out to be the case, and it is a more stable piece of kit that can go into those areas, and I think that's something that could be looked at. And the financial side of it for councils and for DNOs could be made to make sense. Lots of the big infrastructure projects on the grid are funded by taxpayers and foreign investors, energy companies from France and China usually trying to get a return on their investment by selling energy to us. If that was allocated in different ways in consumer homes, and that was a lot of what Jamie and Sam were talking about with that lady, I think there's elements there where the councils maybe wouldn't have to fund it. There's other schemes that could come in akin to the feed-in tariff, but in a different way, to pay for it, and helping those people with their energy bills through the course of doing that as well. So I think that's something that would be a better use of taxpayers' money. There's lots of upsides there. I'm sure the mathematicians and economists would need to crunch the numbers to see if that actually does play out in the way logic is saying in my mind it would. But I think that's another area that can really transform the adoption of this stuff and get it more accessible to more people. Because at the minute it's more of it's a desirable choice. If you've got the spare funds, you're looking at it from an investment point of view, a better way to manage your money. It's not people deciding to get their energy bills down generally because they can't afford to make that decision. They can't afford that leap. I think that's a bridge that needs to be crossed before the mass adoption phase really takes off, if that is going to be the fourth wave.
Yeah, and there's been battery companies that have tried this as well. Obviously, long before the PAS, and we used to fit some for them in my very early days of running my own company. It's a company called Moixa, and unfortunately, that company is no more. It's, I think, got bought by someone, and they don't do those installs anymore. But they used to run test kind of installs with councils. I think it was Grimsby. We had one in where we didn't fit all of the installs, but we were there to take them all out. The course, it had all ran its course, and I mean these batteries are nowhere near what we have today. They didn't really hold any energy, and the trial wasn't necessarily ran in the best way, and the installs weren't that good either. But if you can get some of these other bits right, I think there is still a case for that. I think the biggest impedance now for doing that is probably the PAS document. He's getting these batteries actually into place, because you're right. There's some investment, groups that'd love to bump their green credentials and actually own a bit of infrastructure as well in the UK, whether that's a UK company or not. Which the current tide would probably err on the side of trying to get a UK investor to do that rather than a foreign investor. But yeah, the main thing would be that we're trying to keep people's bills down that are in a bit of energy poverty, but also give it that secondary use to balance the grid.
And I guess in the world of heating, because we've focused heavily on the batteries and the solar side of things, there's obviously the heat pumps, which is a big government policy at the minute, but there's other technologies coming around there as well. We're seeing it with innovation around electric boilers that we're getting a sight of now, where these are not cumbersome big 12 kilowatt inline heaters as they used to once be. These are quite clever equivalents of combi boilers, and there's ground source heat pumps that have been around for a long time. Obviously, there's a small and limited space that you can use those in because of the way they need to be installed. Hydrogen is still something that's floating around in the background, and if you're thinking of this from a kind of plumber's point of view, it's where do you take your trade? And I think looking at it from afar, because I'm not in that sector, I'd say it's still very much in the world of heat pumps, but there's probably some other technologies we don't know about there that might be springing up out of that side of industry, because I think that's still a more immature area to what the solar and battery side is as the whole renewables ecosystem.
The heating side is another really good one, because obviously part of that energy mix for each property is electric and usually gas. And gas is relatively cheap, but it's another cost to a consumer even when you just consider standing charge. You could be looking at 50 odd pence per day just to have the meter there. And so with that, it's kind of, if you can combine the heating and obviously the electric into one meter, you instantly half that daily cost thereabouts on the standing charge. But equally, there's things out there, and HeatGeek have obviously done quite well known in that heat pump space. And I saw an installer. I don't have all the details, so I won't be able to go into it in too much detail, but it was saying that HeatGeek have just released this scheme where it's zero disruption, some sort of scheme called zero disruption, where they reckon they can get you a decent level of efficiency out of a heat pump for a combi swap or a boiler swap, a gas boiler swap, without having to disrupt all of your house, changing radiators and everything else. And the discussion online was whether that's a good thing, or if we should just be looking to make them really efficient to protect their image, but also just to get the bills down. And this installer that was talking about it was saying that he thinks that the efficiency was being gained by running that heat pump on the cheap tariff rather than it being ran with the proper heat loss and the proper calculations being done. So I'll try to have a little bit of a dig into that a little bit more, and would love to have someone come on and that understands that side of things a little bit more as well to explain it. But I think there's a lot going on in that space of trying to make things more cost effective for people as energy prices rise. But it has to be done in the right way to maintain that quality of install, because otherwise the blooming thing will always be breaking down, or it'll always be getting repaired and things. Whereas doing it right first time is obviously quite important. But getting things like the sizing right on things like the heat pumps and the batteries and number of panels and all of that is important as well. So it's not rushing something out, but it's just trying to get something that's going to have the maximum impact. And I do think that this grid demand side response side of things might be a really good key linchpin for it.
I think with the heat pumps, I'd seen similar posts, not that specific one, where there's been a few conversations around the focus on COP and SCOP, whatever it is, and that's the driving element for heat pump installers. We want to get that as high as we can, and the cost aspect of getting there is sometimes so large that it does put people off from taking that step when they could install a system that didn't have that efficiency that they could attain if they spent all that money and swapped all the radiators and pipes and everything else that they need to do. But it'd still be better than having not done it. So I think that's kind of the space that is maybe moving towards. And I guess it kind of compares to us with solar in a way that, we could entirely fill someone's roof with solar panels and, they get all that generation from it, green renewable power. But, is that their best return on the money they're spending in comparison to not having any at all? And, we do more blended and bespoke systems based on the actual consumer's financial situation and what they're consuming in energy. I think with the heat pump side of things, again, looking from afar, there's a lot of the design going in there to get these COP and SCOP figures as high as they can without enough consideration of the budget aspect and what the customer actually is doing with their home, maybe. And again, that's just someone looking at it when you see these posts where they're always going on about these figures. I think sometimes that can kind of blind the true intent of what we're trying to do there of decarbonising the way we're heating our homes. And if we want to get rid of gas boilers and have more people on heat pumps, maybe the focus on those numbers doesn't need to be as serious. Of course, in an ideal world, if someone's got the money, they want to spend it and achieve the best they can, go for it, why not? But for the mass adoption, you're not going to have that in every home around the UK. It's just not a reality.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And I think a bit like what we face day in, day out with, customers wanting to hit a certain level of battery capacity or generation capacity, but just don't have the budget for it at this point. I think, if you were to fit some like a heat pump, get rid of the gas side of things, and then gradually change radiators and improve things going forward, then potentially that's a more phased approach where you can maybe spread that installation out effectively over the next 5 years, where you do maybe a radiator a year or something like that, or as you decorate a room or what have you, and you change the radiator to increase that COP figure. I think that's an argument to be made. Obviously, like with a lot of things, it's cheaper for the person that's paying, whether or not that's the council or if that's an end user, to do it all at once. But equally, if you're looking at a bigger budget and you think I just can't stretch to that right now, then maybe a more phased approach would be better on that. And I suppose the other thing that we didn't mention is things like heat batteries and whether and how they come in, because they're kind of quite interesting and new and something that I'd love to have a go at fitting. But things like that where you can effectively try and remove your hot water cylinder, and it's a much smaller form factor, so you can fit them in more squeezed in more tighter spaces, but also heat it through electric, a bit like an immersion heater, but you just get in almost like a better conversion, because you getting that mixture from changing that chemical that's in it, that's like a hand warmer chemical that you find in like the little personal hand warmers, and moving that solid to a liquid and back again and getting the heat from that. I think that's a really cool technology.
Yeah, there's a big shift, I think, in a lot of thinking around how we heat water and buildings, and the heat batteries is another good one. I don't really know a lot about them other than seeing them at Installer Show. Actually, I forgot what stand it was, but I was speaking to a rep about one whilst I was there, and it did sound like this is a really interesting idea. Again, just thinking of smaller properties where they don't have space for these massive water tanks, and often they end up shoved up in the loft with everything else you don't have space for. And you think there's a place for that technology, and maybe it's something that could come in more widely as well and be adopted in place of regular water tanks as a standard. I think that's the thing to keep an eye on as a consumer and an installer. It's watching all these emerging technologies and thinking, is that going to really benefit me in my business and in my home? And that's what'll drive it. And it's really, really difficult to get that call right. I'm thinking now as a business owner who's looking ahead for where we're going to go. You make your best guess at the best of times for the technologies you pick and the stuff you're looking towards. And from a consumer's side, I waited and waited till I had solar and battery put in my house, waiting for this next thing I'd seen and this next thing. But the most important thing anyone can do really is to start to adopting something. That's when you start seeing your bills come down. That's when you can start having access to all of this stuff. There'll always be something newer and better coming on the horizon. You'll just wait forever and never get going.
Yeah, 100%. I often describe it to people of, as soon as you have to jump onto like the renewables chain and the renewables train and the kind of energy train when it's right for you, when you've got the money there, and when you've got the motivation to do it because you're doing a re-roof, or you've just moved into a new property, you want to get it all sorted, or whatever. It could just be one day you just decide, I want to get my energy bills sorted, I'm going to do it. I've got the money there to do it, and I'm going to jump and do it. And you're absolutely right. I speak to so many people that are like, oh, well, I've heard this new system's coming out. And I always go, yeah, it will be. I said, I don't know that about it, but it will be. All these companies are fighting each other for innovation to be the best product out there. And obviously companies like SIG Energy have put a rocket up the backside of probably quite a few companies out there. And so there are going to be these things that come out and you go, oh, I wish I had that. I have that jealousy. At my house when I'm looking at some of these this kit I'm fitting, I'm thinking, oh, that would have been a much better piece of kit than what I've fitted. But you can't have the most up to date kit all the time, and just by the nature of the innovation in the industry, it's always going to be fast paced and moving because it's a new and emerging technology. We're discovering new things all the time. New companies are springing up. New products are coming onto the market, and I think just to go to your point about what occupies your mind in terms of thinking forward thinking and trying to cover yourself to be kind of there at the cutting edge. It's very, very tricky to see what's coming because it's usually something really new. But I think what we've discussed on this podcast, there's all sorts of things that can come into the market from every different angle. I think it's been open to that change and actually just being aware of what's coming down the track. And obviously in a privileged position as we are doing this podcast, speaking to people and finding out all what's potentially coming down. And at these trade shows, I think it's been quite interesting that I know I've been approached a few times by companies that have developed an AI that links with any battery system, or pretty much any battery system and solar system and heat pump and Shelley and all these other sort of things to try and link everything up so that you can easily buy and sell power. You don't have to do anything. It'll just do it all for you and it'll report what the savings have been or what the earnings have been. And that's why, as we've discussed on this podcast, my feeling and sounds like your feeling is that we're moving more to just a connected home where everything's kind of working together. A bit different to a smart home, but it's not going to pull your blinds down or something automatically, but it will buy and sell power when it's best for you, support the grid, pull power from your car, put power into your car to put into your heat battery. Like all these sorts of things I think are on the horizon, and I think it's just about being open to it. Because we're all in the same boat. Nobody has a crystal ball to actually go, this is what the next big thing's going to be. You just got to hope you're in the right place at the right time to a degree.
Yeah, I think that accessibility to the kit solves a lot of the envy problems as well, because I'm the same as you. I bought into a system just to get started, and I now see this stuff thinking, wow, that'd be loads better. But if it all will link together more nicely in the future, it could be, oh, okay, I can add a bit of that into the mix of stuff I've got, and it becomes less of a factor in the decision making maybe for people who are on the fence with it. I think we've given that a good session of a chat, I think, Sam. That's all I would say to finish is, if there was one thing that could come forward right now that you think could be a real game changer to make this better, what's one thing that you think you could pull out, something coming forward that you'd be looking at?
100,000,000% the car bi-directional charging, discharging, without a doubt. And by nature of that, you'd probably have to get some of the integrations sorted. But I think that is one of the big frontiers that if we can nail that, we unlock so much capacity for people. You're just thinking of office blocks where people have got their EVs on charge. But, if they say if on their Monta app, 'cause a lot of them through Monta and some of these other management charge management companies say, right, I leave the office at 5, so I need my car to be a minimum of 50% charged. So I need that to happen by 5. But during that period, if they've arrived at the office at 20% and they need it at 50% ideally, then throughout the day it can get close to 50%, maybe goes from 20 to 40, and then it plays around with a little bit of energy trading from the car, pulls a bit of power back out, puts it back in when the grid needs it, and by 5 it's then set at 50% as to what you've set. And if you've got an office, if you've got like an office with 20 of those cars there that are doing that, you're not talking mega kilowatts, but if you're playing around with 2 kilowatts per charger, then suddenly you've got 40 kilowatt hours that you're dealing with to support, maybe even run a good chunk of the office or the aircon for the office and all this sort of stuff. So domestically, I think that can work really well, but mainly more on the energy trading side, because the car batteries are just astronomically larger than what homeowners need. But yeah, that would be my one. I think the bidirectional car charging. But what about you? Have I nicked your one?
I think that was a safe bet there. There's like the next big thing in it that needs unlocking, and you're dead right. That is the one. I think the other side of it is in the world of apps, and certainly maybe something that's more central for consumers. Maybe one that can teach them how to work their own apps without having to ring me up all the time to ask how do we change the time on when we're charging our batteries and stuff, because there's still elements of that out there where customers don't fully understand how these things work. They're not all tech friendly people as we are. So yeah, there is that element there as well. I think it is in the world of the apps and the EV access, because you're talking like 25 kilowatts on the single phase DC bidirectional charger from Sig Energy. That's a lot of power to be transferred instantaneously between a vehicle and a home, and then potentially back out to the grid. So I think getting that adopted is something that would be a massive game-changing thing. So just echo that one, really.
Yeah, it's mainly on the car providers, I think. I think that's the main stumbling block at the minute. There's companies like Sig Energy, and I think Wallbox do one as well, and
Indra got one, I think. Yeah, Zaptec have got one, haven't they?
Yeah, Indra have one. It was the last time I saw one of them. It was literally the size of a wardrobe. It was massive. But that was a scheme through OVO Energy, and I inquired for a customer who was going to buy a little second-hand Nissan Leaf, who was just going to park it in his garage, and because he could basically get one for like $5,000, and he was just going to do that and then have a charger and then just bidirectionally charge it, because it was the Nissan Leaf car that was like one of the only ones that was allowing that bidirectional charging at the time. So he was just going to do that because he could get it, nice and easy. But you couldn't buy one of these Indra chargers because it was only through a trial basis with OVO. And you're like, well, that's been years now. Surely we're coming to the stage where we could actually start rolling something like this out. Even if it was a limited charge and discharge, like surely we could do something here. But I get asked about it all the time, and I'm sure you do, with the bidirectional charging and discharging of cars. So yeah, that would definitely be an important one to try and nail. Where that left domestic battery storage, I don't know. Maybe that's one of the tricky ones for people. If they allow cars to be the battery, then where's the place for the home battery? But yeah,
it's a trade. I think there'd still be a place for it, but they'd just be smaller in size, wouldn't they? Most likely to see through the periods the car's out, but. We'll see what's coming. It's exciting. It's a really interesting industry to be involved in, because if you're just a normal electrical contractor, as I was up to 3 years ago, the most exciting thing you had to look forward to was the next RCBO that was coming out, or the next fuse box. And there's only so many boxes you can put on the wall to put your circuit breakers in. I think with renewables and the tech, it's hard work, as we've said right at the start of this podcast. It has its challenges, but fundamentally being in that mix is quite exciting. See what's coming, the learning you can do through it, the opportunity, as you said, we get through this podcast. I've just had the one that's come out today with Wiko and our trip to Italy that we can finally talk about now a bit more in detail, and opportunities like that to see how this stuff's actually made and put together is really interesting. And yeah, just an exciting journey to be on for the next 15 years of my working life before I get to hang up the tools.
Is that what you're giving yourself? 15
years now. I think I said 11 the other day, so it's gone up 4 years. It's gone up 4 years, but yeah, there's not as long left in the game for me now as an old man, but still a bit of time.
Well, I might sack it off in 15 years if I'm feeling like this.
But, 15 minutes based on when I got it.
Yeah, we're lucky to get through the podcast. But no, that's good. I've really enjoyed that chat. I think it's kind of given that topic justice, because we have spoken about that to people like Jason and loads of others about the whole renewables industry, but it's never had the glory of having its own one. But I think that's really giving it a really good angle. And if anyone's got any comments about stuff that we think we've missed on that roadmap to the future of renewables and where we think it's going, and maybe have an insight into hydrogen or all these other things that we haven't massively touched on, we mentioned but not massively touched on, then let us know, because we'd love to have a chat to someone like that that's in that heating side of the industry, especially things like the green hydrogen or something like that. It would be really interesting.
100%. So if you're out there in those industries, get involved in the comments, drop us a DM over and come and have a chat with us if you want. This is an open platform for anyone who's got something to say. If you don't just want to chuck it in the comments, you want to come and speak to us, get involved. As Sam said right at the start of this conversation, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to us wherever you're watching and listening. It massively helps us trying to grow what we're doing, and you will get notified when the next episodes are out. We do have a Spotify account where you can go off and join and get a week ahead of the content. It's like $2.99 a month. It just helps us fund what we're doing here, so that'd be appreciated as well. If you have got the spare money, consider it buying us a coffee. Otherwise, don't forget to give us a thumbs up, drop your comments in below, and we'll see you on the next one.